What happens when one of Hollywood's most untouchable stars sits across from a host who has never been afraid to cut through the glitter and go straight for the jugular? When a carefully polished public image collides with blunt truth in front of a live studio audience. You get a television moment that stops time, leaves the room gasping, and echoes across headlines for days. Before we dive into this shocking showdown between Leonardo DiCaprio and Whoopi Goldberg on The View, make sure you hit that subscribe button to Celebrity Narrator. Like this video, drop a comment below, and join our community, because the story you're about to witness will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about Leonardo DiCaprio. The day began like any other taping of The View. The audience packed the studio, a mix of tourists, die-hard fans, and people just hoping to catch a glimpse of one of their idols. There was electricity in the air, but not the chaotic kind, more like a simmering anticipation. DiCaprio, the golden boy of Hollywood, the Oscar winner, the activist, the man who rarely lets down his guard, was about to make a rare appearance on daytime TV. He was there to promote a new project, something environmentally driven, something he thought would keep the conversation safe, respectable, even inspiring. But Whoopi Goldberg, seated at the moderator's chair, had other plans. As Leonardo took his seat, the applause roared. He smiled politely, charming but restrained, that trademark smirk flickering across his face. Whoopi leaned back, watching him with an expression that mixed warmth and calculation. She knew what the audience came for. Not just small talk. Not just promotion. They wanted truth. They wanted heat. And she was prepared to deliver it. "Leo," she began, her voice calm but edged with a certain weight. "You've been in this business since you were a kid. You've played every role under the sun. You've won the awards. You've done the speeches. But people are asking, how much of Leonardo DiCaprio is real, and how much is performance?" The air in the room shifted. The audience laughed nervously, unsure if this was light banter or the start of something sharper. Leonardo leaned forward, smiling with practiced ease. "Well, Whoopi," he said, his voice steady, "I think any actor would tell you our job is performance. But my passion, whether it's films or the work I do for the planet, that's as real as it gets. That's who I am." Whoopi tilted her head, unimpressed. "That's the answer they all give. But let's talk about something else. People see you on yachts, at parties with models half your age, living the kind of life that doesn't exactly scream man of the people. And yet you're telling the world to sacrifice, to change, to live smaller for the sake of the environment. How do you square that? Because, Leo, some people call it hypocrisy." The words landed like a slap. The audience gasped, a ripple of shock moving through the rows. Leonardo's jaw tightened, though he kept his composure. "I've been outspoken about issues I care about for decades. Yes, I have a life outside of my work, like anyone else. But my dedication is real, and the projects I fund, the actions I take, those are making a difference." Whoopi leaned in, her eyes narrowing. "But isn't it convenient? To preach to the world about saving the planet while flying private jets, while living large. People at home look at that and say, how dare he tell me to change when he won't change himself?" The audience broke into scattered applause, some siding with Whoopi, others looking visibly uncomfortable. Leonardo exhaled slowly, his smile fading. "I knew this was coming. And I'll tell you what I've always told people. I put my money, my time, and my energy where it counts. If I can use my platform to push for change, then that's what I'll do. If that makes me a target, so be it. But I refuse to let critics undermine the work." The tension was thick enough to cut. Whoopi sat back, almost daring him with her silence. She had cracked the golden veneer, and everyone in the room could feel it. And yet, this was only the beginning. The cracks in Leonardo's carefully controlled image were starting to show, and Whoopi wasn't done. What followed would escalate into one of the most uncomfortable, unforgettable exchanges daytime television had ever seen. A moment that would leave Leonardo DiCaprio visibly shaken, the audience torn apart, and the internet ablaze. The silence in the studio lingered, stretching long enough for everyone to feel its weight. Whoopi hadn't flinched, hadn't softened her blow, and Leonardo DiCaprio sat in that chair with the eyes of the world upon him. For the first time, the smooth confidence he usually carried into interviews seemed to waver. Joy Behar tried to ease the mood. She leaned forward with a laugh, her tone lighter. "Come on, Whoopi, don't scare the poor man off. He's here to talk about saving the planet, not get grilled like it's 60 Minutes." The audience chuckled, grateful for the release, but Whoopi didn't smile. She kept her eyes on Leo. Leonardo forced a small laugh of his own. "It's okay. I can handle tough questions. But his hand, resting on the arm of the chair, betrayed him. The fingers tapped restlessly against the fabric, an unconscious tell that he was under strain. Whoopi leaned in again. You say you can handle it, Leo, but here's the truth. People at home don't live in Hollywood. They're not on yachts. They're working 2 jobs. They're worried about groceries. They're worried about their kids' future. And then they see you. And what they see is a man who tells them to do better while living in a way they'll never be able to imagine. So my question is simple. Do you even understand the people you're talking to? The question cut deeper than the audience expected. A murmur ran through the crowd, half gasp, half applause. Some nodded, others frowned, but no one looked away. Leonardo shifted in his seat. His voice dropped, quieter now, but intense. I grew up with very little, Whoopi. I wasn't born into this life. I've seen both sides. That's why I care. That's why I fight for these issues. Because I know what it's like to struggle, and I know what it's like to have privilege, and I know which one needs to change. Whoopi didn't blink. But you don't live that struggle anymore. You're insulated. You're protected. You don't have to choose between groceries or rent. You don't have to take the bus. So how do you speak for people you don't live among anymore? The audience broke into applause again, stronger this time. Some people even shouted in agreement, their voices rising from the crowd. The energy in the studio was shifting, and not in Leonardo's favor. For the first time, a flicker of anger flashed in his eyes. He straightened, his voice sharp now. So what are you saying, Whoopi? That because I'm successful, I should stay silent? That I should do nothing? That I shouldn't use my influence to push for something better? Not silence, she said, her voice steady, calm, but edged with steel. Consistency. Integrity. That's what people are looking for. They don't want to feel like they're being lectured by someone who isn't willing to sacrifice. The audience erupted again, clapping, shouting, some cheering for Whoopi, others visibly uncomfortable as Leonardo's expression hardened. Joy jumped in again, nervous now. Let's not make the man regret coming here. But the damage was already done. The cameras zoomed closer. DiCaprio's polished mask was slipping. His voice rose, heat creeping in. I've given millions. I've started foundations. I've sat with world leaders begging them to listen. And you want to tell me that's not enough because I get on a plane or I go on vacation. Maybe the real hypocrisy is people expecting perfection while they do nothing themselves. Gasps rippled across the studio. A few people clapped, loyal fans, no doubt, but others booed softly, the sound unsettling. Whoopi let the silence hang before speaking. You can get defensive, Leo. But the truth is the truth. People don't want perfection. They want honesty. They want to know you see them. And right now, you're sounding less like an advocate and more like a man trying to protect his image. The words landed like a punch. For a split second, the camera caught it, DiCaprio's face tightening, his composure cracking. The charm was gone. He wasn't Leonardo the movie star, or Leonardo the activist. He was just a man cornered, struggling to hold ground. The audience was on edge. You could feel it in the room, a live-wire tension no one had expected when the segment began. The View had seen its share of arguments before, but never like this. This wasn't politics, this wasn't gossip. This was the dismantling of an image right in front of their eyes. And Whoopi Goldberg, cool and unshaken, wasn't finished. The tension in the studio was no longer subtle. It was heavy, almost physical, pressing down on everyone in the room. The applause and murmurs had subsided into a charged silence, the kind that made every cough, every shuffle of a chair, every whisper sound amplified. Whoopi Goldberg sat tall in her seat, calm as a mountain, while Leonardo DiCaprio leaned forward, his voice carrying the edge of a man who had been pushed past his comfort zone. The other co-hosts glanced between them, unsure whether to intervene or let the storm rage on. Joy Behar fiddled with her note cards, Sunny Hostin shifted in her seat, and Sarah Haynes forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. They all knew what was happening. This wasn't just another celebrity interview. This was a reckoning. Whoopi didn't flinch. She studied Leonardo like a teacher waiting for a student to admit he didn't have the answer. So tell me, Leo, she said, her voice measured, deliberate. If the work you're doing is enough, why does it feel like every time people hear your name, they're hearing about another yacht, another party, another model? Do you really think that doesn't undermine your message? The audience gasped. Some clapped, others shook their heads. It was the question people whispered but rarely asked out loud. Leonardo's jaw clenched. His eyes darted toward the cameras, then back to Whoopi. His voice dropped into something raw, less polished than before. Because the media feeds off that. They don't care about the meetings with scientists, the hours spent lobbying governments, the billions raised for conservation. They care about who I'm seen with, where I vacation, how I live. That's not the whole picture. Whoopi leaned in slightly, her voice softer but cutting. But it is part of the picture, and you don't get to pretend it isn't. For a moment, DiCaprio said nothing. His lips pressed into a thin line. The audience was restless now, shifting, murmuring, sensing the heat about to boil over. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was sharper than anyone expected. You know what, Whoopi? Maybe you're right. Maybe I don't live the same life as the average person. But if people want to tear down the one person who's been shouting about this crisis for 20 years, then maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe the problem is a culture that would rather focus on tearing people down than building solutions. The words reverberated through the studio. Some clapped loudly, a small group of his supporters cheering, but the reaction was mixed. Others sat stone-faced, unimpressed, unconvinced. Whoopi didn't clap. She didn't smile. She let the silence speak for itself, then dropped her voice into a low, deliberate tone. Or maybe the problem is that you want to lead a movement without being willing to walk in the shoes of the people you're asking to change. You're telling people to sacrifice while you live without sacrifice. And that, Leo, is why people call it hypocrisy. The audience erupted, cheers, applause, shouts. A few boos broke through, but the roar of agreement was louder. The sound rolled across the studio like a wave, crashing against Leonardo's already fragile composure. He sat back in his chair, shaking his head slightly, almost laughing in disbelief. His eyes flashed with something between anger and exhaustion. So what do you want me to do, Whoopi? Sell my home? Stop working? Never get on another plane? Is that the answer you're looking for? The question wasn't rhetorical. It was sharp, demanding, pointed directly at her. The audience quieted instantly, waiting for her response. Whoopi's expression didn't change. No, she said simply. I want you to be honest. Don't tell people to live one way while you live another. Don't stand on a stage and act like you're the voice of the people when you're living above them. Own your privilege. Own your contradictions. People will respect that more than pretending you're the saint of climate change. Leonardo's mouth opened, then closed again. His breath was heavy, his shoulders tense. For the first time in a long time, the man who had commanded movie sets, red carpets, and world stages was at a loss for words. The audience felt it too. They weren't just watching a celebrity being interviewed anymore. They were watching him unravel. Joy jumped in, trying desperately to steer the conversation back to safer waters. Well, let's talk about your new film project, Leo, because I think our viewers really want to hear about the work you're doing there. But the audience wasn't ready to move on. A man in the second row shouted, "Answer her, Leo." The crowd buzzed, emboldened, their voices rising. Leonardo turned toward the audience, his face flushed. You think it's easy? You think it's simple to balance this? To live in a spotlight where every move is scrutinized, judged, twisted? I've been fighting this fight longer than most of you have even been paying attention. And all anyone wants to do is call me a hypocrite because I don't live in a hut somewhere? Is that what it takes to be taken seriously? His voice cracked with frustration, echoing through the studio. The audience responded in a cacophony. Some applauded fiercely, others booed, others shouted back. The studio was no longer controlled. It was chaos. Whoopi stayed calm, almost eerily so. She leaned forward, cutting through the noise with a voice so steady it demanded attention. Leo, nobody's asking you to live in a hut. They're asking you to stop pretending you're something you're not. They're asking you to be real. And right now, you're showing us the real you. Defensive. Angry. Fragile. Maybe that's the Leonardo DiCaprio people have never seen before. The words hit like a thunderclap. The audience froze, stunned, then erupted again. This time louder, more divided. The room practically split in half. Leonardo's face went pale. He looked around, searching for an ally, but the co-hosts stayed quiet, the cameras stayed fixed, and Whoopi's gaze stayed locked. He was trapped. He swallowed hard, his voice low, almost trembling. You want the real me? Fine. The real me is someone who's terrified. Terrified of what's happening to this planet. Terrified that no matter what I do, it won't be enough. Terrified that all people will ever see is the headlines and not the work. You want honesty? That's it. The studio went silent. The audience stopped mid-clap, mid-boo, mid-shout. The words hung in the air, raw and unguarded. For a moment, Leonardo DiCaprio wasn't the untouchable movie star. He was just a man admitting his fear. Whoopi nodded slowly, her eyes softening for the first time. That's the Leo people need to hear from. Not the perfect activist. Not the Hollywood star. The man who's afraid, who's flawed, but still trying. That's the truth. That's what connects. The audience erupted once more. But this time, it was different. The applause was thunderous, unified, almost cathartic. People were on their feet, clapping, cheering, shouting his name. Leonardo sat back, breathing heavily, his eyes wet, his face caught between relief and humiliation. He had been cracked open on live television, stripped of the armor he wore so well. But the moment wasn't just about him. It was about the audience, the viewers at home, the millions who would watch this clip replayed over and over. They had just witnessed something rare. The breaking of a facade, the collapse of a carefully constructed image, the raw truth of a man cornered by questions he couldn't dodge. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every second, knowing this was no longer just an interview. It was history in the making. And as the applause continued, Whoopi leaned back in her chair, satisfied. She hadn't destroyed Leonardo DiCaprio. She had revealed him. The moment would ignite headlines around the world. But in that studio, in that instant, all that existed was the sound of hands clapping, the roar of voices, and the image of a Hollywood legend finally brought to his knees. And the storm wasn't over. The applause thundered on long after the segment ended. The producers, sensing the moment had already spun beyond control, rushed to a commercial break, cutting the feed while the cameras were still trained on Leonardo DiCaprio's face. He sat frozen in his chair, jaw tight, eyes glassy, the sound of the clapping and shouting washing over him like a storm tide. The studio lights dimmed, signaling the pause. Crew members darted across the set, fixing microphones, whispering instructions, trying to contain what had just unfolded. But the damage, or perhaps the revelation, was already done. Leonardo leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand across his face. Whoopi Goldberg sat calmly beside him, sipping from her mug as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The other co-hosts kept their eyes down, pretending to shuffle papers, but their silence said everything. They had witnessed something raw, something uncomfortable, something unforgettable. The audience remained restless, buzzing with energy. Some were still on their feet, clapping, others whispering frantically to each other, some shaking their heads in disbelief. A woman in the front row pulled out her phone, whispering to the person next to her. "That's going viral tonight. No way they don't cut it, but somebody's already got it recorded." They were right. Clips were already spreading, shaky phone footage capturing Leonardo's voice breaking, Whoopi's piercing questions, the audience's divided reaction. Before the show even returned from commercial, Twitter was aflame. Hashtag DiCaprio exposed trended within minutes. Hashtag Whoopi versus Leo wasn't far behind. When the cameras came back, the hosts tried to reset. Joy Behar put on her brightest smile, her voice unnaturally cheery. "Well, that was a passionate conversation. Let's shift gears now and talk about your new documentary, Leo." Leonardo forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. His voice was low, careful, each word chosen with precision. "Yes, it's a project I'm deeply proud of. It's about the urgent crisis we face and the steps we can still take, if we act now." The audience clapped politely, but the energy was different. The elephant in the room had already taken center stage. No amount of polished talking points could erase what had just been revealed. The mask was gone, and everyone knew it. The segment ended with a round of applause, the audience rising as Leonardo stood and shook hands with the hosts. Whoopi held his gaze as they clasped hands, her expression unreadable. Leonardo gave her a tight nod, a silent acknowledgement of the duel they had just fought. Backstage, the atmosphere was thick. Assistants hovered nervously, handlers whispered, producers exchanged frantic looks. Leonardo walked quickly, his team flanking him, their voices urgent. "Leo, we'll control the narrative, don't worry. We'll spin it. Emphasize your vulnerability. Make it about honesty. Do not respond on Twitter." "Not yet." But Leonardo said nothing. His face was pale, his eyes distant, his jaw set. He walked straight to his dressing room, the door closing with a decisive slam. Whoopi, meanwhile, strolled calmly through the halls, greeting crew members, smiling at fans waiting for autographs. When asked about the interview by a producer, she shrugged. "I asked the questions people wanted answers to." He gave them. Inside Leonardo's dressing room, the silence was suffocating. His publicist spoke quickly, already drafting statements in her head. "We need to frame this as authenticity, Leo. You were vulnerable. People will connect with that. We'll emphasize that you admitted your fears. That's the story we tell. But Leonardo shook his head slowly. That's not what they'll see, he muttered. His voice was flat, drained. They'll see me losing control. They'll see me cracking. And he was right. By the time he left the studio, the internet had already written its version of events. Clips of Whoopi's sharpest lines spread like wildfire. Memes of Leonardo's frustrated outburst. "What do you want me to do, live in a hut?" circulated with brutal speed. Some mocked him, others sympathized, but no one was silent. One tweet read, "Whoopi Goldberg just did more journalism in 10 minutes than most outlets have done in years. Hashtag Whoopi versus Leo." Another shot back. Leo was honest. He admitted his fears. "That's more human than any politician I've ever seen." Hashtag DiCaprio exposed. The divide was stark. Some hailed Whoopi as a truth teller who cut through Hollywood hypocrisy. Others defended Leonardo, calling him courageous for admitting his vulnerability on live TV. But either way, everyone was talking. That night, major outlets ran with it. The Hollywood Reporter, DiCaprio cornered, a brutal interview on The View. The New York Times, the cracking of a star, Leonardo DiCaprio's vulnerable moment. Daily Mail, meltdown on live TV, DiCaprio explodes under Whoopi Goldberg's grilling. Pundits debated it on late-night shows, podcasts dissected it frame by frame, and YouTube was flooded with reaction videos titled "Leo Destroyed on The View" and "The Moment Whoopi Broke DiCaprio." For Leonardo, the fallout was suffocating. Paparazzi swarmed his home, reporters shouted questions about hypocrisy and honesty, and late-night comedians turned his "live in a hut" line into the joke of the week. His friends sent messages of support, but even they admitted, this was different. This wasn't just gossip. This was an image fracture. But there was another side to the storm. Fans rallied to him online, praising his honesty, defending his decades of activism. Some argued that Whoopi had gone too far, that she had ambushed him, humiliated him for ratings. Petitions surfaced, hashtags flipped sides, and the debate raged on. And Leonardo himself? He stayed silent. For 3 days he said nothing, retreating from the public eye, letting the storm spin without him. Then, on the 4th day, he posted a single message to Instagram. A picture of the Earth seen from space. The caption, "I am not perfect. None of us are. But I will never stop fighting for this planet. Even if I stumble. Even if I fall. Because the stakes are too high to stay silent." The post exploded, millions of likes, hundreds of thousands of comments. Some mocked, some praised, but all engaged. And Whoopi, when asked about the interview on the red carpet days later, she simply said, "It wasn't about tearing him down. It was about holding him accountable. And I think he showed people more of himself than he ever has before." The world had witnessed something rare, the unraveling of a star's armor in real time. Not in a tabloid scandal, not in a paparazzi photo, but in a confrontation broadcast live to millions. It was messy. It was brutal. It was unforgettable. And as the dust settled, one thing became clear. Whether you sided with Leonardo or with Whoopi, you couldn't look away. This was no longer just an interview. It was a cultural moment. A mirror held up to celebrity, activism, privilege, and truth. A reminder that even the brightest stars can crack under the weight of their own image. And now it's your turn. Whose side are you on? Did Whoopi go too far, or did Leonardo finally show us the man behind the legend? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear where you stand. And don't forget, subscribe to Celebrity Narrator right now. Because this story is just one of many shocking, dramatic, unforgettable moments we bring to life. Hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and stay tuned. More stories are coming, and trust me, you won't want to miss them.